He's authorized the call-up of as many as 50,000 reservists. Now for the latest from the Pentagon, let's go to Bob Franken. He joins us live. Bob.
That was the request from his Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, and was approved quickly. The President authorizing 50,000 reservists to be mobilized. Of that number, about 35,000 are planned immediately, most of them in support functions. Homeland Defense is how it was put in the statement that came from the Pentagon. The Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, etc., Marines are all determining exactly which units they're going to need, so it could take several days before the actual call-ups begin. That is what is going on inside the Pentagon. Outside the Pentagon, of course, is the continuing effort to try and repair the massive damage from Tuesday's collision between that American Airlines 757 and the wall of the Pentagon, which, of course, has been burned into our minds as an image of that horrible day. The searches continue for any possible survivors, although officials will privately admit that is a futile search. They're also continuing to try and shore up the part that collapsed, the actual wall that collapsed. The more successful they are in doing that, the more successful they are in entering some areas that are just completely blocked off because of prohibitive rubble. The fact that we're inside this building is remarkable if you look back, of course, at the beginning on Tuesday and for a day or so afterwards. It was not that easy to operate from here. You can still smell the smoke. And an interesting sidelight has emerged from this entire matter on Tuesday. After the first plane hit the World Trade Center, military officials scrambled jets from Massachusetts and New York. The jets were not able to get to the site of the World Trade Center before the second plane hit it. They never got the chance to discuss whether they would have shot down that plane which was carrying passengers. At the same time, with suspicions that another plane was headed for the Washington area, jets were scrambled from Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. They did not arrive quickly enough either. The plane had already collided. Again, no conversation about whether they would have shot that plane down. There have been some people who are now raising questions about the quick response or lack thereof on the part of the military, but it is one of the sidelights in a story that is so bizarre, so tragic, both in New York and here at the Pentagon. Zane?
But what kind of concerns are there or have there been discussed about calling up those reservists?
The concerns are not really that much. The United States has about 1,300,000 reservists, an integral part, a seamless part of the military. So many of them were called up during the Persian Gulf War. The normal kinds of concerns you get are the concerns about the personal affairs of the different people who are in the reserves. They are citizen soldiers, they have family lives, that type of thing. So military officials are going to be asking for volunteers first in the units that are affected, and the shortfalls in the volunteers, of course, will have to be made up with people who perhaps will not be too happy to go, even though they realize that way of life is a reality for reservists and members of the National Guard in the United States.
Bob Franken reporting to us from the Pentagon. John.
Well, as we've been hearing from the Pentagon over the last few hours, armed with broad congressional support to use force, the Bush administration is beefing up the military. President Bush has given the Defense Department the go-ahead to activate up to 50,000 National Guard personnel and reservists. Administration officials say the primary role of the troops to supplement recovery and domestic security efforts. Military planners have identified an initial allotment of 35,500 reservists from the various services. 10,000 of them would come from the Army, 13,000 from the Air Force. The Marines would provide 7,500, the Navy and Coast Guard 3,000 and 2,000 respectively. The congressional resolution authorizes a call-up of 1 million military personnel, and one powerful senator says if that's not enough, bring back the draft.
We should not be reluctant to use all of the forces at our command, including our citizen armies and including a draft. So the reserves today, we're going to be called up to 50,000 of them. Those are our citizen soldiers, and the draft, if it's necessary to prevail, I would vote for it absolutely. This is December 8th, 1941, but this time it's a war against terrorism. But the people here are so determined. We have that absolutely unified determination. So yes, if we need the draft in order to carry out a successful war, I would vote for it.
Congress is showing a united front in granting President Bush the authority to retaliate against terrorism. But as Jonathan Karl reports, some lawmakers still have concerns about just how far those powers should go.
With virtually no dissent, Congress authorized the president to use all necessary and appropriate force against all those tied to the attacks.
For constitutional purposes, it's the same as a declaration of war. There is no constitutional difference between authorizing the president to use this kind of force and saying we declare war.
The hurried vote united conservatives and liberals who usually disagree about military intervention. Paul Wellstone, whose first significant vote as a senator a decade ago was against the use of force against Iraq in the Persian Gulf War, was one of the few to speak before the vote.
It's going to be a long, difficult struggle, but I believe people in our country and people in Minnesota are united in this. But we need to do this the smart way.
Despite the lack of debate, members of both parties had privately objected to a White House request for a more open-ended authorization of force against terrorists. As a result, the resolution passed authorizes the president to use military action specifically, quote, against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons.
It relates to the incident, and there's broad authority relating to the incident. It does not relate to all terrorism every place.
Several key leaders hope to avoid a repeat of the 1964 Tonkin Gulf Resolution, in which Congress, after North Vietnam allegedly attacked U.S. warships, almost unanimously granted President Johnson the authority, quote, to take all necessary measures to prevent further aggression by North Vietnam. Many in Congress came to regret that as the Vietnam War escalated and grew increasingly unpopular. While only Congress has the power to declare war, the president, under the Constitution, has the power to repel invasion. And if a war drags on, Congress, with its power of the purse, can ultimately bring an end to it by refusing to pay for it. Jonathan Karl, CNN, Capitol Hill.
As the U.S. narrows in on a target for any war, one thing is becoming clear. When the U.S. strikes back, it will be counting on broad international support. CNN's Andrea Koppel has more on that.
If, as the U.S. suggests, Osama bin Laden was the mastermind behind Tuesday's attacks, going after him and shutting down his al-Qaeda terrorist network will require more than just a military assault on Afghanistan. That's because over the years, al-Qaeda has become an international network with cells rooted in almost every region of the world. That's why Secretary of State Colin Powell has put the world on notice. The United States needs help.
I am not threatening so much as I am saying this has become a new benchmark, a new way of measuring the relationship and what we can do together in the future.
Since Tuesday, Powell has had the world on speed dial, in particular reaching out to countries where the U.S. says Islamic militant groups have links to bin Laden's network.
Once these people have been trained in Afghanistan, we know that they've gone to Africa, we know that they've gone to Asia, we know that they've gone back to the Middle East, and it's clear now that they've also come to the United States.
People like Ahmed Rassam, the man charged with attempting to bomb the United States over the millennium. He's a member of Algeria's armed Islamic group, but was trained by bin Laden. So were members of Pakistan's Harak-ul-Mujahideen group, which hijacked an Indian jetliner to Afghanistan in December 1999. On Friday, Pakistan's president informed the U.S. his country is prepared to take specific steps to help the U.S. wage its campaign against bin Laden. And in the Arab world, Powell has asked countries like Saudi Arabia to cut off the flow of money and resources to bin Laden. For Secretary Powell, who led Allied troops to victory in the Gulf War, this war against terrorists will be fought on an entirely different battlefield.
And so you have to design a campaign plan that goes after that kind of enemy. And it isn't always blunt force military, although that is certainly an option.
But diplomatic sources say whatever option the U.S. chooses to take, it will need the support of Islamic countries. Such support would send a strong message to bin Laden and his Islamic extremist supporters around the world. They have nowhere to hide. Andrea Koppel, CNN, at the State Department.
As Andrea mentioned, Pakistan says it's ready to give some support to the United States as it wages a war against terrorism. CNN's Tom Mintier is monitoring things very closely in the capital, Islamabad, and he joins us now. Tom.
Zain, there is a combination meeting right now between the Security Council and the cabinet of the Pakistani president. I managed to speak with Mr. Musharraf as he was going in, and he said they were going to be debating the pros and cons. It's a debate that's been going on now for a couple of hours. It's rather extraordinary, this session that's going on. The last time that these two groups sat down in the same room was just before a summit meeting with India. So it doesn't happen all the time. We were fortunate enough to be inside as it was starting, and the president called on everyone in the room to stop for a moment of silent prayer for those who were killed in the terrorist attacks in Washington and New York.
May I first of all take this opportunity to request all of you to join me in a 1-minute silence in memory of all the innocent people, the thousands of innocent people killed in this terrorist attack in the United States, the thousands of innocent people from all over the world, people of all religions, and may I also add people of all ages, children, young men, women, and old people. Let us all join to observe 1 minute silence in their memory.
This cabinet meeting follows two other meetings, one just yesterday of Army commanders, and then the Security Council met the day before after the president came back from Karachi. He was there when the attacks took place, flew back into Islamabad, and immediately went into a session with his advisors, which lasted well into the night. Just a few hours after that, the U.S. ambassador met on at least 2 occasions at the president's house with the president outlining the U.S. position. Now, what's being debated right now inside the cabinet is how to respond. And as that meeting has taken place, there is also a new development from the Taliban. The Taliban issuing a warning that any nation who cooperates with the United States would side with the United States and go against the Taliban would face their own problems. Joining us now from Kabul, Afghanistan, is Nick Robertson with more reaction on the Taliban statement. Nick?
Well, certainly, Tom, the Taliban really apparently trying to influence the debate that's currently going on in Pakistan. Their statement came out early this morning, just before those key ministers were about to meet. And what they have said is that any country, any neighboring country, particularly Islamic countries around Afghanistan, should they give their soil or their airspace in support of the United States attacking Afghanistan, then they would have to expect a response from Afghanistan. The Taliban said that they could mobilize a large mujahideen, a large fighting force, to invade that country. So certainly the Taliban trying to influence that debate. And from their spokesman in Pakistan, the Taliban had this to say.
If neighboring or regional countries, particularly Islamic countries, gave a positive response to American demand for military bases, it would spark up extraordinary danger. Similarly, if any neighboring country gave territorial way or airspace to USA against our land, it would draw us into an imposed war.
And the country here really is being prepared for the possibility of war. On the radio last night, in a rare 15-minute address, the supreme leader of the Taliban, Mullah Muhammad Omar, said people should put their faith in Allah, that they shouldn't be afraid of attack from the United States. If they put their faith in Allah, they would be okay. He said that in the past, Afghanistan had been attacked by the great empires of the world. He talked about the British attacking some time ago, said that at that time Osama bin Laden wasn't in the country. He talked about the Soviet invasion of the 1980s. Again, he said Osama bin Laden wasn't in the country. And he said again, as we stand, as the country of Afghanistan stands to be attacked by the third great empire of the world, he said that people should realize that it wasn't about Osama, that in fact it was very much about the demonization of Islam. So certainly the country here being prepared for what could be coming next. Nobody here quite sure of that at this time.
All right, Nick Robertson reporting from Kabul, Afghanistan, and the meeting is still going on. We will bring the results of that cabinet meeting here in Pakistan and the decision they make about providing assistance to the United States as soon as it is over. I'm Tom Intier, CNN reporting live from Islamabad.
He'd seen the pictures on television, he'd heard detailed reports, and on Friday, President Bush got to view the wreckage of what was the World Trade Center for himself. From Washington, CNN's Major Garrett has more on Mr. Bush's visit. Major?
Morning, Jonathan. Before we talk about the president's visit yesterday to New York, I can just tell you the president is due to meet with his entire national security and diplomatic team today, and they are clearly paying very close attention to the activities both in Pakistan and the statements from the Taliban in Pakistan and then the statements from the Taliban government in Afghanistan. The president and his national security team weighing all options, military and otherwise, and will be meeting throughout the day to weigh those options. As for the president's visit to New York yesterday, he wanted to get to New York just as soon as possible. There's been quite a good deal of security concerns here at the White House. I can tell you the Secret Service was lobbying against this trip, considering it a bit of a risk for the president to go up to New York City. The president pressed ahead. And when he arrived in New York City, he toured the damage at the World Trade Center and then had this to say to the workers he has often described as heroic who are dealing with a massive recovery effort there.
Well, I'm shocked at the size of the devastation. And it's hard to describe what it's like to see the gnarled steel and broken glass and twists the building silhouetted against smoke. I said that this was the first act of war on America in the 21st century, and I was right, particularly having seen the scene. However, out of the rubbles and ash and ugliness, there's a lot of good, starting with the guys from LA that are here. They've come all the way over from California to help brothers and sisters in need. That's a symbol of the greatness of the country. This is a country that's coming together. I was also struck by how angry many of the workers were, in spite of the fact that they had worked to exhaustion. Yeah, they're angry. They're angry at the people who did the crime. They're angry at the people who destroyed life. They're angry at people who caused the devastation. And as I said, I heard they're angry. And America will feel the same way. And our response will be one that is justified.
So what's your level of satisfaction with how the investigation is progressing and how the intelligence gathering is going at this point?
I am satisfied that America has rallied during this terrible tragedy. I'm satisfied that the compassion of the nation has risen to the surface. I'm satisfied that if in any community, if we asked for help, we would find it. I'm also satisfied that the 4,000 FBI agents are working tirelessly to gather all the evidence that can be gathered, to find those who may still be in our country if they are here. I'm satisfied that our planning for possible future actions is going on course. But most of all, I'm satisfied and I'm pleased to be an American. This is a proud moment for our country. Out of this terrible devastation and ruin, the greatness of America shines forth. And I'm here just to, as best as I possibly can, to thank the American people who are helping here and to give comfort to those who hurt. A lot of the firefighters who we saw had tears in their eyes because they lost loved ones and their brothers are missing. It's a sad moment. And the least I can do is to give them a hug and maybe encourage them some.
The least the president could do, he said, is give a hug or two. Senior White House officials say that while the president was in New York at the Jacob Javits Center, he was scheduled to meet for about an hour and a half with family members of those missing and feared dead in the wreckage of the World Trade Center towers. That meeting ended up lasting more than 3 hours, the family members clutching the president's hand, asking him at times to sign autographs, just to be with them. Many, many hugs exchanged. The president, overwhelmed with the grief he saw, did his part, as he told aides later, to offer some semblance of comfort, some spiritual sustenance to those who are grieving so very deeply. Jonathan?
Major Garrett, thanks very much. We want to bring you some news not related to the attacks in the U.S. A gunfight broke out overnight between Israeli troops and Palestinians. There are conflicting reports about what happened, though. Palestinian security sources say the Israeli army entered a section of the West Bank under full Palestinian control. It's known as Area A. Palestinians say the troops occupied a checkpoint and used it to shoot from. Israelis confirm there was an exchange of gunfire, but deny an incursion into that Area A. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society says 4 Palestinians were wounded in the fighting.
And back to our coverage of America's new war. We've heard the accounts of victims of Tuesday's attacks making phone calls to their loved ones. There were many I love yous, the last thing that people were hearing, and many also called and found answering machines.
You can well imagine that families are holding on to those words, reflecting and treasuring what they've heard. Thelma Gutierrez reports.
September 11th, American Airlines Flight 11 crashes into the North Tower. Jill Gartenberg's husband is inside.
Called my office. I got to my office probably 2 minutes after he left his first message on my machine saying there was a fire in his building on his floor. He didn't know if he was going to make it.
18 minutes later, United Flight 175 slams into the South Tower. Lori Van Auken's husband, Kenneth, makes a final call home.
It was just horrible. It was really just horrible. I could hear the terror in his voice, and he was trying to sound like he was calm for us, but you could hear the chaos in the background and the terror in his voice.
I hope I live.
Some 30 minutes later, somewhere above the Pentagon on American Airlines Flight 77, Barbara Olson calls her husband Ted and tells him hijackers have taken over.
She told me that she had been herded to the back of the plane. She mentioned that they had used knives and box cutters to hijack the plane. I had to tell her about the 2 airplanes that had hit the World Trade Center. Why? I just felt that I had to.
On United Flight 93 over Pennsylvania, Thomas Burnett calls his wife.
And he said that somebody was already dead, that they had stabbed somebody, and that they were all going to die, and that they were going to try to do something.
Mark Bingham calls his mother in the midst of chaos.
He said, I just want to let you know that I love you all. There are 3 men on board who have taken over the aircraft, and they say they have a bomb. And at that point, we were cut off. He wasn't able to say anything else.
Moments later, the plane went down, and families forever lost their chance to talk with one another.
Some family members will take comfort in the fact that they were able to say their goodbyes, that they were able to express certain feelings that they have, such as I love you.
Annalisa Van Kirk is a medical social worker who deals with trauma.
That they were able to communicate with the people in their lives that were important to them, and that we can take comfort from.
One of the last things Melissa Hughes did on September 11th is call her husband Sean.
Sean, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. A plane hit the building or a bomb went off, we don't know, but there's lots of smoke, and we just wanted you to know that I love you always.
Thelma Gutierrez, CNN, Los Angeles.
Grief counselors say that everyone mourns in their own way, but what's hardest for those pacing New York's streets is that they're still waiting to find out if they have someone to mourn.
I just wanted to walk through that door and make everything go away.
We're still hoping. It's getting harder to hope.
People are realizing that they may not ever have knowledge of where their loved one is, and I think that's been devastating.
We just saw names of, people confirmed safe, and that was it, but his name unfortunately wasn't on it.
I haven't lost hope since 9:15 in the morning on Tuesday, and I'm not going to lose hope until I get the call that my brother's dead.
I felt relieved because he is not on the list, so therefore there is still a possible chance that he is alive and he is doing at least somewhere in some of the hospital system and unidentified.
I think the heavens opened up because they're all in mourning for New York City, for Washington, for everybody that's been struck by this devastation.
There are some people who are being very stoic and perfunctorily just going through the process. There are other people who are at very high levels of emotion, who are very grief-stricken and distraught.
We're hoping and praying for miracles, but they become very difficult. I think reality's sort of setting in.
As the days goes on, you see hope dissipating, and you see people coming to the realization of the magnitude that this event has caused on them and the city and the country.
Remember, you can email photos of missing friends or relatives of the missing at CNN.com, or just go to CNN.com and click on the link. The pictures will be posted on our website along with emergency contact phone numbers. So please make sure you send a contact number along with the picture.
Our coverage of America's new war continues into the next hour with more live reports from around the globe, so do stay with CNN. For now, I'm Jonathan Mann.
And I'm Zane Verdi. We leave you now with sounds and images from Friday's prayer service at the National Cathedral in Washington.
Those of us who are gathered here, Muslim, Jew, Christian, Sikh, Buddhist, Hindu, all people of faith, want to say to this nation and to the world that love is stronger than hate, and that love lived out in justice will in the end prevail.
Today we gather to be reassured that God hears the lamenting and bitter weeping of Mother America, because so many of her children are no more.
With broken and humble hearts, and with tears in our eyes, we turn to you, our Lord, to give us comfort. Help us in our distress. Keep us together as people of diverse faiths, colors, and races. Keep our country strong for the sake of the good and righteousness.
My prayer today is that we will feel the loving arms of God wrapped around us, and will know in our hearts that He will never forsake us as we trust in Him.
On this National Day of Prayer and Remembrance, we ask Almighty God to watch over our nation and grant us patience and resolve in all that is to come. As we've been assured, neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth can separate us from God's love. May He bless the souls of the departed. May He comfort our own. And may He always guide our country. God bless America.